So here are all the parts that came with the solo music gear bass guitar kit, the Beatles guitar kit. You get a manual, which basically lays out, what do we got, 9 pages of instructions that are fairly basic and don't go into detail. And then, of course, the body of the guitar itself, and the neck, which is actually quite a nice neck. Rosewood on top, I'm guessing, and a maple neck. And of course you see 69 there, and there's a 69 in there that's matched with the neck. And it does have some nice green work, which I hopefully will be able to accentuate a little bit. I've already done some measuring across the top to find center line and so on and so forth. And that's what the green tape is. It didn't come with that. The other things that come with it are strings, a little cap for the truss rod with the 3 screws, the 4 turning knobs, machine heads, and the associated screws, washers, and nuts, the bridge saddle, and a little Allen wrench to adjust when you want to adjust the height. Actually, to adjust the thread going into the bottom part. And the truss rod Allen wrench. And the pickup selector and volume with the associated 4 screws. The tailpiece with the 2 screws. Pick guard with 2 screws. And the 2 pickups, which I don't know what they are. There's no indication as to what the pickups are. They're very basic, I'm assuming. You get a little guitar cord and the button caps for the straps. And I noticed that I'm assuming that the button strap for the end of the guitar, this is the screw for it, and those are the little button caps. And I'm assuming that is going to fit through the 3rd hole in the tailpiece. And it actually doesn't fit that hole, so that is something that has to be determined at a later date. There's 2 holes for those 2 screws, but that buttonhole screw is just not going to fit through there at this point, so it might need to be widened or a different screw got. Okay, so some of the first things that I noticed on the body. First of all, it's very rough. It has the poly seal on it that they indicate that they've sprayed on the entire guitar, and it has a very nice edge to it, which I'm assuming is a plastic edge. Don't know for sure. The grain is very nice, should come up very nicely. One of the things I noticed inside is that there is what would, I guess, normally in a violin would be a sound peg, but in this case it's just a simple block of wood. And as you can see, that block of wood is not of the highest quality and has, you know, I don't think its intent is to transfer sound, or if it is, it's not going to transfer sound really well. It's not attached to the bottom of the body very well. It's attached, but it's not, hasn't been sanded to the shape of the body. So the sound transference is going to be limited on that, which I'm guessing is not an issue. Looking down it, you can see the peg. There's the hole for the controls and the 2 holes for the pickups. Just at the point of gluing the neck into the body, and a couple of things I noticed about this kit is that you will see this edge is a little bit thicker this way to the other one. Put a micrometer on it. It just is a little bit thinner on this side than on that side. The angle here is already set for the neck, and according to the fantastic responses that I've had back from Solo, very quick responses back. It's been fantastic, but they say that doesn't need to be adjusted. It's where it needs to be. So a couple of things that I noticed was this was a little thinner than this part, and also when I put the neck in, the neck is higher, sits higher here than it does on this side, and I thought the neck was twisted. But in actual fact, when I put a measurement on it, I find out that in fact this side here is actually narrower than this side here. I'll just open that up so that you can see. And when I put it on here, you can see the space, hopefully. So we got about, it's at least 1/8 of an inch difference between the width of this and the width of this side. And as I go around the instrument, it gets wider. As I get here, there's not so much play. And on this side, sorry about that, on this side it's pretty much even all the way around, and on this side it's pretty much the same, but it even gets worse during that part there. So my biggest concern was that when I put the neck in, that it sits, that it's not crooked, because when I put the neck into the body, roughly in its place here, the space here from the fret to the body is larger than the space here. You can see here it's almost touching the edging, and here again about 1/8 of a difference. So does that mean that the whole neck is twisted in the body and it's raised up higher here? So in fact, when I measure this, I find out that this is actually narrow. When I look down the neck, I find that it's very flat to the body. So that tells me that the inside angle plate is, in relationship to the body, is fine. So I'll just have to live with that difference in this area here. And you only see one side at a time, so it's not that big of an issue. So one of the first things I did was to clean this up, get all the poly seal off. And you want a nice tight fit when you're putting this in here, tells me. Matt from Solo tells me. You don't want it loose, you want a nice tight fit. I was worried about breaking these edges here when I put the neck in, putting too much pressure on this, but it hasn't. I cleaned this up, and the angle's right. I put a piece of tape across here to indicate where I want the edge of the pickup to come. So I've had the pickup in here, and I've using just masking tape here to just help me find places so that I don't have to mark up the guitar itself. And you can see also that I've put the neck in, and I've put 2 lines down here. I found the center line right, that's the center of the block underneath, and it happens to be exactly the 30-inch scale that that they say in the book. So that all works out really well. It's actually 15 1/8 to the 12th fret from the edge, from the fret edge of the nut to the 12th fret is actually 15 inches and 1/8. And so I'm going to set my neck 15 inches and 1/8 from the center line over the peg to there. And I know that the saddle center is going to sit right on there. I've also cleaned up this, sanded this up, and took a little bit off of this just to relieve a bit of the pressure on that side, and it fits much nicer now. I don't feel like it's straining the body. But as you can see, it fits in there quite nice, and most of the things I read say that it's going to sit, the body's going to sit at the 16th fret, and that's exactly where it's, so that's 12, 13, 14, 15, 16th fret. The 15th fret, or the 12th fret, of course, is an octave. So the full length of the string and half of that makes an octave. The full length is from the nut to the saddle, and then halfway is the octave. So I'm about to glue this in and clamp it in, and I don't have any styrofoam. I'd like to put some styrofoam over this, but what I'm going to use is just some cardboard to protect the frets. And then I'm going to put that piece over there. I'm going to put some cardboard underneath. Put some cardboard underneath where I'm going to clamp, and then I'm going to put another board under that. So the clamping is going to be right down through there and through there. I'm going to clamp in two places so that I'm clamping here and clamping here, so that I'm getting the two spots on there. There's no point in clamping down here at this end because there's nothing to clamp to. And the last clamp that I'll put on will just be a side clamp that'll just pull the side in and make sure that I got a good contact on the sides. So that's where I'm going to go now. So prior to the gluing, of course, I've done all of the measurements, and I've made little marks at the side. I've put the neck in, I've positioned it, and I've measured from the 12th, middle of the 12th fret to the center there, and the middle of the 12th fret to the nut. And those two distances are the same. And when the neck is positioned correctly, I actually have a 30 1/8, I believe it is, distance, because I think it's a 16, 30 1/8 is the distance between the nut and the center line there. So that's twice the distance from the nut to the 12th fret, which I've already said. I've put the pickup in, and I've marked where the edge of the pickup is, and so the neck is going to just come up just a tiny bit shy of the bridge pickup, because I don't want it actually touching. I still want to be able to move, but I don't want it cramping the pickup encasement, the surrounding of the pickup. So I've done that. I've marked where it's going to be, where the position is. So I'm ready to roll on this, and I feel fairly confident. The other measurement that I did, of course, was to see what the rise was on here in relationship to the actual, because that's the other measurement you need to be concerned about, of course, is that when your bridge is on here, that when your neck, and by putting a straight edge on your neck, you want your strings that to be about the middle of your saddle there. So you can maybe see that is just coming into the middle of the saddle. Now I have the saddle lifted a little bit, but the saddle bridge assembly, that's coming in nicely right into the middle. And one of the nice things about this kit is that there's a lot of adjustment. Because this is not a fixed bridge, it can move back and forth between, in my consideration is that it stay on that block of wood underneath the front, just in here. So, you know, I have that much movement, which is a huge amount of movement. If I get this neck wrong, it's going to be difficult if I bring that neck in too far, because I can only go back so far. I don't want to be back here. I don't think this is going to be an issue at all, but it's just to say that there's a lot of flexibility here in adjustment because of this. Also, there's adjustment up and down. So even if those strings came in quite low or quite high, you still have a fair amount of adjustment. But you know, my feeling is it should be right in the middle of that when it comes off of here. So when that's sitting on the, this is sitting tight to the frets. Those strings, if you imagine them, they're going to be a little bit higher than that, and they're going to come in right in there. And they'll of course be raised up, but there's a lot of flexibility, so I'm not too worried about that. But that, of course, where the strings end up here is determined by the angle of that block underneath the neck. It's determined by that angle on that right there. Okay, so nice little bridge, I thought, as well. These kits are pretty amazing for the dollar that you pay for it. So that's going to sit in there like that, and we're going to glue it up like that. I think I'm ready to go. So just talking about the glue that I'm going to use for this, there's a few glues that guitar builders use, is my understanding. A hide glue, which is basically a glue that you melt, made from hides, animal hides, and you melt it, and it's a lot more difficult to use, and but the advantage is that if you ever need to take the joint apart, it comes apart with heat, so it's very good for that instrument repair. One of the most pervasive glues is the PVA, polyvinyl acetate carpenter's glue. This one happens to be yellow, but generally they're white. I think Lee Pages has made it yellow to make it look more like a carpenter's glue. And the other one that I'm going to be using on this, which is called an aliphatic resin glue. And they call it a carpenter's glue as well, but you can see that both are that creamy color. But this is aliphatic and this is a PVA. And there's a difference in strength and in moisture resistance, and that's why the aliphatic is used most often, is my understanding. So that's what I'm going to roll. So I'm going to apply this glue, and I have my clamps ready here. And one of the things about glue, no matter what glue you use, the chances of the glue actually not holding is pretty slim. I've seen most of the time that the wood breaks apart before the glue does, no matter what wood glue you're using. But this aliphatic has a good moisture resistance, and it has a stronger holding. And of course you want to get this completely in here, and these areas covered, so that you get just a bit of glue squeezing out. You always want to see a bit, and you want to make sure that all the edges are joined, all the surfaces, sorry, all the surfaces are touching, and that's vital to a good glue joint. Okay, I'll just put a bit on here as well. I've got a line here that kind of helps me determine where that glue is going. One thing about glue is that after it dries, it's a little harder to get off than if you wipe it when it's wet. And so I'll give this a final wipe. Also, depending on the finish that you're using, you don't need any on the end there, obviously. So I've done it all the way around. And the nice thing about this is you've got a little bit of time to work with. You don't have to go crazy rushing with it. So I'm just going to set that in there right now, and then I'll get the clamps. I have a fair idea of where it's got to sit. So I'm just going to push that down and get it placed to where it needs to be. That's perfect. Right there is where I want it. Let's give a bit of a wipe. Finger cleaned off. That's looking pretty good all the way around. It's positioned well here where I want the tape to be. It's marked where my marks are on the side. It's positioned. So I should be able to clamp that in now. There's my bottom bit. That's going to go under the block. And there's my top that's with the cardboard that is going to protect the frets. Hopefully, ideally, I would have styrofoam, a closed cell styrofoam, but I just don't have any of that, so I'm hoping that this will do the trick here. So my first one is just right there. I'll just clamp down on that. I can see the glue is coming out already, which is great. And my other clamp is going to go a little further down, but not right to the end, remember, because that thing, that block underneath, the neck extends past that block. So there we are. That going in there beautifully. Twisting a bit, but I don't think it's going anywhere, that neck. So those are good. And clamp down now. And the neck is right where I want it to be. I can see inside that some glue has dripped down, which is not a bad thing, but might as well clean it up while I can. And that seems to be setting in there quite nicely. So the other clamp that I'm going to put on is just a side clamp, and that's just going to be move that bit. And that's just going to be on the side here and the side here. And the intent of this is just to pull those sides in so that it is nice and tight up against the neck. These expandable one-hand clamps are fantastic because you can do things with one hand, and it really helps when you're holding two bits of wood. There we are. So that's squeezing that in there nice and tight on that corner there. So that's it. The guitar will sit there, and it appears that I might have done okay with it. First time ever doing it, so I have to trust my intuition on this and what I've read. 24 hours later, and the clamps are now taken off, and I'm pretty happy with the way that this has turned out. You can see now the difference in the height. Here, the edging is just touching the neck, and on this side, the edging is a little bit above. So there's a little bit of a difference in the height, as I spoke about before, in these areas here. It came together okay. You can see there's a bit of a space right there, and on that side it's very tight. But again, I've got a little bit of a space right along there. I might fill that. I don't know. We'll see what happens when we do the staining. So overall, it's where it should be, and when we do the measurements, again, for the whole length of the guitar, try and get that in the picture there, and we take that from the nut to the 12th fret is about 15 1/16 just to the middle of it. 15 inches and 1/16 right to the middle of that fret there. And when I take this here, and I'll just put it on the 2 so that I can get it right on, I get 17 1/8. So when I subtract the 2 off of this side, that of course brings it up to the 15 1/8, which is right in the middle of where that post is underneath. So with this being the center line and this being the cross line of the scale, that point right there is the very center of the saddle. So that's the lengthways. Now how is it on the angle going down from the guitar? And when I look at that and put a straight edge on that, and I put the saddle where it's supposed to be, and I bring that up, you're not going to see that very well, but it's hitting right about 1/4 of an inch below the top of the saddle. I've got the saddle right down to the bottom. I've got it as tight as I can to the bottom, and theoretically then the strings will be just above that, and the strings should just come in over top of that. So that should work fine. A couple of things. One of this bridge, the saddle, is very rough on the bottom and is not curved at all to the shape of the top of the wiggles. So I'm going to, and you'll see this on other YouTube videos, it's a neat idea where you just take sandpaper and basically attach it to the top of that, and where you're going to have the bridge, you just sand it down at that level, just working it back and forth so that the rosewood gets the proper arch on the bottom there. You want to have everything fitting nice and tight wood-wise for sound transference as well as for stability. So the next step is to now sand this, get the poly resin off. I've already started sanding a bit on it. I'm going to start with a 220 grit, and I'm going to go to a 400, and I may go to a 600 after that, depending on what I'm going to do, how it turns up. So I'm using one of these little blocks. This is a 220 block, and one of the reasons I'm doing that is it keeps it nice and flat so that I don't round it off when I'm sanding. I can keep it nice and flat to the wood, and it's going to be a little trickier in there. Obviously I'm going to have to find something smaller, or maybe I'll cut one of these in half or something like that. So I'm going to sand all of the polyseal off, and then I'm going to stain it. So that'll be the next step. Okay, so now it's had its first full sanding of 220 up and down the neck, headstock, and I've just vacuumed off all of the fine dust. Coming up pretty nice. I've put a bit of glue and used kind of a woodworking trick here. In this area here where I had the gap, I put more glue in there and then basically sanded into the crack so that the glue and the wood would mix together and harden. So I think I may have solved that problem with the crack there, but we'll see what happens. Anyway, I'm about to do the shaping of the bridge, and I've covered the guitar with just clear packing tape, and this is to prevent any of the dark wood from getting onto the blonde wood of the maple. I just want to have to deal with that with the rosewood here. I know that the bridge is going to sit right in this area here, so basically, rather unsophisticated, I'm just going to work this back and forth. I saw another video on the YouTube with a fellow that he created a flat metal piece to hold this while it moved very slowly. You can have a look at that. I'm not going to be quite that sophisticated, but it is a bit uneven, and I think it does need to be kind of cleaned up a little bit. It's a little high centered, so I think this will do it. Basically, I've taken one sheet of 150 sandpaper to dig in pretty good, and then I've surrounded it with this packing tape. So I'm just going to work it back and forth like this over the hump, and I'm looking down the guitar as I do this, and I'm kind of centering it by eye, and you can see already that there's a chunk coming off of the middle there, and that's exactly what I want. And when it feels to me like it's balanced on the wood, I'll leave it at that, because I think that'll be good enough for this purpose. What you don't want to do, I think, is probably tilt this, or you want to try and keep this as flat as you possibly can while you're moving it back and forth. So as I work this back and forth, I can, if I hold it by the ends and hold that down tight to the top, I can feel when it starts to grab a little bit more. And I'm only moving it a tiny bit over that area that I know is going to be where the saddle's going to sit. I don't want to take it off of that hump too much. But I guess ultimately, this is a fairly unsophisticated way of doing it, but ultimately I can feel when I'm dragging the whole unit. And you can also see that I'm now picking up the brown all the way across, not just in the center of the sandpaper. So that's telling me that I'm getting pretty close. And I'll finish this up with a finer, but I think this is going to be enough to do what I want to do. And I can feel already that the rocking back and forth on the top is considerably less. And I'm looking down the guitar across the bridge so that I can see that it is pretty much centered on where I want to be. Like I said, it's not that sophisticated, but it seems to be working just fine. Taking a fair amount off, and the bottom is getting, oh, there we are. The bottom is getting a nice curve on it. And you know, it might even be worthwhile turning it around the other way and going the other way with it as well. Assuming that the top is symmetrical, and maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Okay, so we're now at the point of doing some staining. I've now sanded the guitar completely with 120, 220, 400, and then a 600, and just wiping the guitar with a wet tack rag just to pick up the grain, and then sanding again. And it's come up very, very nicely. It sanded very nicely. A couple of things I noticed when I was sanding. One was this edge here was very, very open and got a little bit thin, so I injected a bit of glue in there, and also again this joint right here, I was able to get some glue into that and close it up a bit, just pushing some sanding bits into it while the glue was wet, sanded at the same time, and I think I've got it. So now I'm going to stain this, and I've decided to use a water-based stain for a couple of reasons. One, because it has no fumes and it's safe to use inside, and the other is that it goes on really quite wonderfully. So I've begun staining the back and just working through that. My intention is that I'll stain this and then I'll sand it again and then stain it and sand it. And the product that I'm using is called Salmon, and the really cool thing about this product is it comes in tons of colors, and I've decided to go with Golden Wheat on this project. And then once I've done the stain on it, then I'll put on the clear coat high sheen product that they also sell to put over top of it. The nice thing about this is it's water, so you don't have to be real careful when you're going towards the binding at the side. It just wipes right off, and ultimately when I sand again it'll take that off, even if I miss a little bit there, but it seems to be coming off quite easy off the binding when I accidentally touch the binding with the brush. So that's nice. I don't have to do a whole bunch of taping. So basically I'm just spreading it around on the guitar at the moment, and this is an area where I just wiped it off, but just want to get a smooth. Now they say to use a rag. I prefer to use a, or they say to use a sponge, and I prefer to use a brush, so that's what I'm using. So I'll come back to you when this is done. Here we are. I have put now 3 coats of the stain and clear onto the guitar, and I'm pretty happy with the way it's come together. I've also stained the end here, but not the back. What I ended up using was a mixture of this, the Salmon High Gloss, and then mixing the stain into it. So it was a mixture of about 15% of the stain and 85% of the clear, and I tried it with just the stain and I wasn't having good success, so I mixed it with the clear and basically end up with a mixture that looked like that. And when it goes on, it's quite transparent because there still is a lot of clear mixture in it, clear gloss, I should say. And so that worked well. I put on a coat, and then I'd sand it with 400, and I'd put on another coat, sand it with 400, put on another coat, sand it 400. So that's where I'm at right now. And I'm fairly happy with the way it ended up. I'm now going to put multiple layers of just clear onto the whole guitar, the entire guitar, including the neck and head and the front of the head. Of course, not the fretboard, but that should be the last of the, it should be done by then. And the wood is okay to work with. It doesn't come up quite as what I thought it would, but I'm still pretty happy with it, and I'm happy with the Okay, so here I am back, and you can see that the guitar has now been all put together. So quite a jump from the time that I ended the last video. Basically, what I've done is that I've used the stain that I talked about, but I wasn't happy with the gloss finish that I was getting. So I ended up actually staining it and putting a gloss cover on it. And with this, the stuff that I was using, the material that I was using from Salmon. And then I ended up actually sanding it with 400 sandpaper, 400 grit sandpaper, and leaving it a dull finish, which I actually really like and I'm pretty happy with. And the good thing about it is that it actually helped to cover some of the imperfections of a amateur finisher, guitar finisher, and some of my mistakes. So I'm pretty happy with that. I waxed it, polished it, and left it in a nice dull finish, and I'm pretty happy with the end results. One thing I would say about the wood, of course, is this is plywood. It's not a solid maple top, and you can see the plies in the holes where the pickups are, and the plywood is fairly unforgiving when you start sanding and going anywhere deeper and trying to take imperfections out, and you're never going to get that, I don't think anyway, a quilted look. So in the instructions they recommend using an oil. I think an oil would be great because it'll cover up all the imperfections of the wood really well, and if I was to do it again I would go with an oil. Also, an oil is very easy to wipe off the bindings, and I had a lot of work to clean stuff off the bindings. So I think an oil would be a great way of going, and ultimately the finish would be really nice. I've used oil before, and it works really nice. Okay, just a little side note to this. You can see that the guitar is not really finished on either side of the neck. They put a binding here, but there's no binding down the side. And I still haven't decided what to do with it. I guess I could have stained it, but it's plywood and I was worried about the end grain looking crappy. So I might end up putting something along there just specially made to cover up that end grain on those. It's not the end of the world, but it's kind of a bad little finish on the guitar, and it needs to be cleaned up. The neck was great. I just sanded it down, put some clear coat on, and it just is fantastic. I put oil on the frets, a nice teak oil actually, but any kind of oil would work, and it really brought the rosewood out, which is fantastic. Once I got the body to a place that I was somewhat happy with, I went ahead and put the machine heads in, and they went in very easily. Good instruction on that. And one of the things you need to understand is that this is solid maple, the head. And so it's very unforgiving. And as you can see, right, I don't know if you'll be able to see this. Let's see. You'll see that I snapped off the heads of one of the screws because I did not drill the holes quite large enough, and the hardware, the screws are not of a highest quality, and three of them went in just fine, but the fourth one, the head snapped right off. So I'm going to have to take that out, and let me see if I can show you there. You can see the head snapped right off of that. So I'm going to have to take all four out and redo it. For the time being, it's held in place with what's left of the screw. So that was a little learning curve there. Make sure that your holes are large enough. The same thing happened on the truss rod plate. Two of the screw heads snapped right off. And I used a 1/8 inch bit for the holes, and it wasn't good enough. When you really reef on those screws to get them in, the head just snapped right off. So make sure that your holes are large enough to accept the screws easily, because they will not withstand a lot of pressure. The next thing that I did was put the pickups in, and the wiring diagram is pretty bad with the instructions on this that they provide. However, I gotta say the service has been outstanding, and they have responded almost immediately to any concerns that I have. I had some concerns about putting the neck in, and as you see, that turned out just fine. The wiring, put the pickups in. The long wire obviously went to this one, and the other pickup I used, they're identical pickups. You can see that the plastic plate needs to bend around the top of the guitar. So there's flexibility there. And again, be gentle with the screws. You're only going through plywood, and you don't want to strip that, otherwise you are in trouble. The screws are very long, but they do go in, and you can adjust up afterwards. So I believe the one with the yellow wire went here, the one with the red wire, the shorter wire went for the bridge pickup. Ran them over there, and then I asked them for a better wiring diagram, and they gave it to me. So that was the wiring diagram, and he sent it to me and explained how to do it, and I did it, and it worked, obviously. So you too can get a wiring diagram from him. He said that he was going to make it a little better, the one that's on the instructions, because the one on the instructions really doesn't tell you what it is. So one of the things that I did was I put this with the writing facing down, so it was the other way around. You can see the writing is the way it is now, and it faces the guitar player, the bass player, not the person looking at the guitar. So that's the way it should be. That's the way Höfner puts it in, and I had it the other way, which was really confusing because this was controlling this, and that was controlling. It was all backwards. So I'm first time doing this, and I didn't look up, but there's a really good video of a fellow explaining the buttons and how they work. Anyway, it became obvious that I had it upside down, and I put it in the right way, and it all made sense, because I was questioning whether I had actually done the wiring correctly. So once I had the bridge pickups in, I had it wired up, put the piece through here, the 1/4 inch jack. I put the G string and the low E. I put it on, wired it up, hooked it into the tailpiece, and I pulled the tailpiece back so that I could look down the guitar and sight where I was with these strings, and I marked where the tailpiece should go in relationship to those two strings and drilled that. Those screws went in. The tailpiece went on, no problem. It was perfect. Put the bridge on, sort of centered it where I thought it might be, where I'd put the mark on for the center of the guitar, and strung it up, tuned it up, and I got really nice octaves. And when I put the tuner on it, the octaves are exactly where the half octaves are exactly where the full octaves are. So good intonation, and it, you know, you have a ton of flexibility on this bridge as to where it can live. One of the things about the bridge is that they have these pieces that are stuck out here, and the height of the bridge, I have it all right down on the low, on the G string I have it right down, and on the E string I have it raised up a bit, but that still leaves a chunk of these screw bits up, and I'm finding that it's grabbing my hand, so I think I may take some off at the bottom of those, pull them out, cut some off and put them back in, because the strings are fairly high off of the board. I'm not getting any rattle at all. That's the low, and I'm really pulling on that. So I've also just asked about a question. I haven't had a response back yet, but the plate here, I noticed when they put them in the factory that they have a little, you know, the metal bar that holds the pick guard out, and that didn't come with this. So I'm assuming the idea here is to just screw this straight onto the body. And I'm not sure whether I'm going to put it on or not, because I kind of like the look of it without it. A little question about the saddle, or not the saddle, but the straps. Again, it wasn't clear whether that center hole was for that button for the strap. The screw didn't really want to fit through that metal piece, but it did. And I chose to put the button on the tailpiece like that, and put two of the long screws in on the tailpiece. It's a lot of fun to play. It's a kit. You get what you pay for, and you know, the neck is good. The neck is good and straight. Generally, the construction is good, and I don't have any complaints at all. I mean, any of the things that went wrong were my fault. The only complaint I would have is the screws. Don't seem to be as strong as they need to be. But again, that can be solved with a little deeper, wider hole for the screw. So, all in all, I'm pretty happy with a kit like this. I've got great enjoyment out of building it. If I did it again, I would probably do it different on the top, the color, but I'm pretty darn happy with the color. But it was a lot of work to get it to where I was happy. And yeah, and it's a lot of fun to play, and it sounds fantastic. And I'm sure that putting different pickups, higher end pickups in that would even make it better. So anyway, that's the project. If you have any questions, you can certainly email me. Okay. Talk to you later. Bye. So after about 2 notes, you'll recognize that I am not a bass player, but I thought it would be worthwhile to actually talk, let you hear the bass, not talk. So I'm basically I'm enjoying playing this because it's got some great sound to it, and it is a really nice sort of woody sound, which is great. The strap button is on the back, as I discussed earlier, and the other button is right here. I just put it on the heel, and that works great. There's a lot of debate on the internet about straps And of course you can't put the traditional Höfner bass Beatles strap on here because that went underneath the actual fretboard and strapped around and then came up. And so this is working fine, and I don't feel like the bass is going to fall forward and tip forward. And it's a lot more comfortable than playing with this on your leg because it kind of tends to dig in after a while. So it's got, I'll just put both pots up full, and I'll switch back and forth between the two. And with them both on, there's of course, the rhythm and the solo, and here's the difference in the amplitude. So that's on the rhythm. There's a considerable volume difference between rhythm and solo. With a pick. Finger. It's a lot of fun to play.